that all it took was 30,000 more troops. Well, the fact is that Baghdad and Iraq had really changed over the course of 2006, and that the strategy had we employed the same strategy that we used in 2007 and 2005 and 2006, I'm not sure it would have worked. So I guess this tells you that context matters, that, coin strategy isn't a silver bullet. It's not just a question of sort of applying the doctrine to get us out of jams. And I worry, I see this sometimes a little bit in Afghanistan. You see young, I don't think at the senior levels, but at the younger levels, company commanders, and to a certain extent even battalion commanders, this notion of, well, I've got my coin doctrine, and it says, I need to have my KLE, which is my key leader engagement, and I need to pass out my HA, which is my humanitarian assistance, and then I need to make sure my soldiers are equipped with lots of MRK, which are my mosque repair kits. It's just paint and speakers, and then the people will like us, and the village will be pacified, and it will, we'll connect it to the government. And it's never that simple, and I worry that in some cases, some of our sort of triumphalist strategy, history of 2007 might lead us in that direction. The other caveat that I'll make with regard to what happened in 2007 is that we still really don't know. And I think we won't until an Iraqi history is written from the Iraqi perspective. I think and again, I'm hazarding guesses here, but I think the Sunnis made decisions internally based on dialogue between the tribes. I assume dialogue with the Saudis and others in the region. I think Muqtada al-Sadr made decisions about a ceasefire. I think those were influenced by things that we did, certainly. But I also think that there's a lot there that's opaque. Discussions the Iraqis were having, meetings that they were having that we weren't at. And until the Iraqis sort of write their own history of this from their own perspective, which I think will read very differently from our history, we should be cautious. The second thing I really liked about it was Steve's suggestion that we need a new conception of insurgency or counterinsurgency. We tend to have this notion that the counterinsurgent's role is to support and augment the host nation government, that people can be enticed to support a host nation government that they see as illegitimate or fundamentally working against their interests. And I think that that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think the worst of this, it becomes the sort of 3 cups of tea counterinsurgency. I'll sit down with with these people, and they'll get to know us, and they'll see our good intentions, and that they'll do what we want because, they see we're good people and they like us, when they're going to do what they think is best for them. And whether they like us or not, it's certainly helpful not to be a jerk and shoot up their market, but they're not going to do anything, either the Afghans or the Iraqis, because they like us. They're going to do what they think is best for them. And that I think Steve's exactly right that in a lot of these instances, we're going to end up working with corrupt governments and flawed governments that don't necessarily share our interests. And that was certainly true in Iraq, and I think it's definitely true in Afghanistan. And the thing I liked most is his recognition that the answer to this may mean that in a lot of these places like Iraq and Afghanistan, it's going to be dealing with subnational organizations. Those may be tribes, they may be something else, and that our counterinsurgency strategy as we built it doesn't sufficiently account for that. I think it's particularly relevant right now in Afghanistan, particularly with President Karzai coming next week, that we tend to make this all about Karzai and his personality. Oh, if Karzai was more this or Karzai was more that, then our strategy would be working, and that he's the problem. When in fact, I think in some ways that Karzai and his personality is not the problem in Afghanistan right now. That we've created this, the most centralized government system, and we did it in 2002 since North Korea. I mean, it's obviously doesn't control things the way the North Korean government does, but it's incredibly centralized, where President Karzai is picking, essentially district commanders. It would be like President Obama picking the mayor of Richmond, and it's just crazy in a place like Afghanistan. And so, and we have a real tendency to defer to this system we built, and we built it because we didn't want to encourage warlordism, but we defer to it, and I think it may not be workable. So I think that's a great notion, that we really do have to think hard about our sort of conception of the counterinsurgency doctrine. Not that it wasn't great when it was written, and not that it wasn't incredibly helpful at the time, but it's worth rethinking that. And then we hit the 2 things that I didn't like as much about the paper. Steve talks, I think, absolutely correctly about getting the military more involved in strategy and the need to sort of integrate political and military planning at this sort of strategic level. And what I didn't like was the notion that we need some sort of broad strategy council of chiefs and COCOMs and others to provide input, which he suggests. Because I don't think it's about meetings, and I don't think it's about structure. I think it's about who our generals are. And how we educate them. And I'll use General Petraeus as an example here. I mean, to call somebody a political general, has been such an insult for such a long time, and I think that was really deleterious to the kind of input that Steve's talking about. And Petraeus is a political general, but I think he's a political general in the best sense of the word and not the worst sense of the word. And the key is, if you look at how he grows up in the Army, he spends an incredible amount of time working for generals, whether it be General Galvin a couple of times, General Shelton, General Vono. And rather than sort of being praised for this time he spends kind of watching these guys operate at this sort of political military level, he tends to be criticized as somebody who's not getting his boots dirty, who's too close to the flagpole. And it doesn't just exist in the Army. I think it exists throughout the military. And as a result, I think we have senior leaders who aren't particularly well equipped to wade into this world. And I think creating new mechanisms and structures doesn't necessarily help them. What we really need to do is think about, well, how do we choose and educate our strategic leaders? And we tend to pick the best brigade commanders as our generals, and I'm not sure that that's the right model. The things that make you a great brigade commander, there's some overlap with the things that I think make you a great strategic leader, but there's also a lot of diversion, and I worry we're particularly, at various points, maybe picking blind. So then the second thing that I didn't like, and this is much more of a quibble, is there was a suggestion that had we been smarter about training and equipping the Iraqi security forces in 2003, we might have cut this off. And I certainly agree that we needed to be better at training and equipping units. But I think that the issue in Iraq wasn't the lack of competent security forces early on. I think what was really driving things, this was a political battle, and I think at some level it was almost inevitable that the Iraqis, were going to move towards this sort of civil war, and that we need to remind ourselves that, there really aren't military solutions to problems like Iraq, that there are political solutions. And so that's sort of where I'll wrap it up. Those are the things. That said, though, I thought it was a terrific paper, particularly on the sort of the suggestions of a new conception of counterinsurgency and insurgency, which I think is much called for, and we really need to be questioning ourselves on that. And his notion that we do need, the military leaders were sort of deficient in their input into the sort of the political military strategy process. I just think the mechanism that we suggest is insufficient to the task, the problem that we identified. So I'll leave it there. And congratulations on a great paper.